Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, March 5th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 181 days, the game against Michigan in 267 days. As we have been doing a position by position run through the Ohio State team in the lead up to spring ball on the Buckeye Weekly podcast, I have found myself over and over saying, I'm really interested to see how this shakes out this year. Different positions, different battles, different players we haven't really gotten a chance to see. It is just, there are a ton of interesting storylines all across the Ohio State team this year. And I was talking to my guest today, Brett Ciancia from Pick Six Previews. We were talking right before we hit record on the show. And you said something interesting. You said the Ohio State spring game might be the one that you are the most interested to see in the whole nation this spring. Brett, why is that?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for having me on. It's great to be back on the show. And yeah, I'm not just saying that because it's an Ohio State show. I truly believe it. You know, I cover every spring game that comes out. I cover all 66 Power 5 programs. If there's a spring game, I'm watching it. And when it comes down to this 2021 cycle, I think Ohio State's the most intriguing out of all of them. A couple of reasons for that. Obviously, right off the top, the easy one's the quarterback battle. Not even is it just a two-way battle. You got three guys in there with Stroud, Miller, and McCord. So that's unsettled. You're looking to replace, a guy that just set a school record in rushing, Trey Sermon. He's gone. They just released today, actually, the number of NFL draft combine invites, and Ohio State's number one with 14, way ahead of the pack. So, basically a lot of talent is leaving. The whole linebacker core is gone. Stars up front, stars in the secondary, really every position group besides receiver. So, position groups are up for grabs. But another thing, to peel it back another layer, is with a program like Ohio State and the Alabamas, the Oklahomas, the Clemsons that really send a lot of guys early to the draft, juniors and third-year sophomores going pro frequently. Those spring practices are so crucial, and even those non-conference games in the fall when you're up 35-0 at half, you're getting all these young guys in there, this valuable playing time against an Akron or a Ball State. But the issue last year with a shortened season, just 5 regular season games, a lot of those young depth guys, those freshmen and sophomore 5-star kids, didn't get that, experience. And I think Ohio State only had 3 spring practices, so you're losing 12 spring practices and a spring game last year. So I'm just curious, and it's not even just an Ohio State issue, but some of these programs that send so many guys quickly to the pros, are they like a year or two behind on development? So just on a high level, that's really intriguing to me. And one last note, too, I'm almost treating it as a coordinator change year on defense because I know that, in 2019, Jeff Hafley left to take over Boston College. Kerry Combs came back. But really what they did there with the shortened spring was they kept the same system that Hafley ran, even though there was new parts. I mean, you lose, I think it was now 3 starting corners in the NFL, plus a Heisman candidate, Chase Young. So you lost a lot of what made that defense special. Had to keep the formula the same, the playbook the same just for continuity purposes, even though it may not have fit the personnel perfectly. So I'm looking to see how he, tweaks it a bit and adjusts it a bit to fit the new personnel.
Now, our listeners are probably sitting there nodding along and going, yep, that's all true. Yep. And, as you mentioned, you are not an Ohio State person. This is something you are tracking for 65 different programs across the country for your Pick Six preview, which is a fantastic book. I will throw in a plug right now. I'm going to throw another plug in later because it is a fantastic book. It comes out in mid-June. Well worth your time. Check out pick6previews.com, SIX. Written out, not the number, pick6previews.com. You can find a ton of great information on there. I wanted to, first of all, get a little sense for what is the next few months of your life like? Because between now and mid-June or so, when that book is coming out, there is a lot of football to watch, I would imagine. A lot of probably conversations to have, a lot of statistical stuff to dig through. What is the next 3 or so months of your life like as you're trying to get from, a bunch of blank pages to a really, really in-depth analysis of 65 teams?
Yeah, thanks for that praise, Tom. I appreciate that. And for the listeners that don't know, I launched this in 2012, and over those first 9 seasons, I've been graded the most accurate Power 5 prediction, magazine in the country, and that's beating all the ones on newsstands, everything online. Not just me saying it, that's Stassen.com, who's graded publications for 30 years now. So according to their formula, I've been the most accurate for 9 years. I got my Heisman Trophy vote 2 seasons ago, which is an incredible honor. And yeah, it's a one-man show. I'm covering all 66 teams. So, I'll rewind a bit back to the fall. During the season on the Saturday, I have 3 screens going for 14 straight hours. I'm trying to absorb as much as you can, every game I can see. But even that doesn't cover it all. So throughout the week, I'm kind of rewatching condensed games, calling around to some media members across the country, getting some insights. But, the first couple months of this off season, I'm trying to just relive the season. I go back, I listen to conference specific podcasts, team podcasts, shows like yours, to get some really, inside info and really just get into the details. I love digging into the details. A lot of the national guys might stay very vague, but you got to dive in and give the people, some real insight. So I'm kind of in these weeks, I'm kind of reliving the season, watching tape, running my numbers, because I like to strike the balance between game tape and the numbers. I mean, you see some guys that are too heavily on the number side and vice versa. So I love the balance there. So tapes and numbers, calling head coaches and calling coordinators. So last year I got to speak Ohio State related with Brian Hartline, one of the best receiver coaches in the country, I'd say. And, so making calls across the country to coaches, coordinators, and then spring games. And then after that, it's writing season. So I'm going to have to write this up and rewrite it, edit it, everything, and then design it. So it's a full 7-month project for sure. I love every second of it, and excited to dive in.
Yeah, this seems like one of those things where it's like, all right, I love college football. Like, how much do you love college football? Do you really love college football? Do you really, really love college football? You have to really, really love college football to go into the level that you do. I mean, you mentioned Ohio State being the number one or right at the top of the list of spring games you're most interested to watch. How many of those 65 teams spring games do you get to watch or available for you to watch? Is that like most of them, just about all of them? I mean, I would assume that's gotten a little bit easier to do over the years with the growth of conference networks and that type of thing.
Oh yeah, conference networks and YouTube have really been the game changer. You wouldn't have, 10 years ago, you might have had a handful that were televised and you DVR them, but now, yeah, I mean, Big Ten Network's been great. They pretty much air them all and then have the reruns running. Pac-12 Network helps a bit too. And now with the ACC and SEC networks too. So really the Big 12 is the one that's kind of hard to find sometimes, but out of 65 in a normal non-virus year, I'd say probably 45 to 50 are viewable. And, and another thing is too, others critique me on this, they say, oh, it doesn't matter who wins if it's Scarlet versus Gray or whatever, it doesn't matter. But really, yeah, obviously the score doesn't matter. I want to see how the new prospects look, how these early enrollee freshmen look. What kind of scheme has been installed and with new coordinators, that kind of thing, position battles, and even also just listening to the broadcasters on these, because to be able to broadcast a spring game, talking about 85 scholarship players, they did their research too. So they did their interviews on campus. They talked to players. So just getting the insights from the broadcasters goes a long way. So there's a lot of value there if you're trying to evaluate a roster and predict the season. So yeah, I take any info I can get, and that's a pretty helpful one.
Yeah, after last year, I don't think anyone's going to be taking their spring games for granted yet. Ohio State has not yet announced whether they're going to have fans in there or how many fans they're going to have in there. They're still kind of working on those details, but that is something that I think Ohio State fans might be looking forward to even more than normal this year. One other thing that you do on this is just a Twitter thing that you do, but it is endlessly fascinating to me. It's something that I've seen come up a few times over the years. You said you've been doing it like 3 or 4 years now. Your poll of which programs are college football blue bloods. And that's a really interesting concept to me, because it's something that sort of changes over the years, but it feels like it doesn't change quite as much as you might think just year to year. Like normally the internet is full of like snap judgments. And this one is really interesting because it takes a little time for someone to become a college football blue blood. Can you first of all explain, this is a poll of, I mean, you had over 100,000 votes last year. I mean, some crazy number. What to you makes a college football blue blood? Because everyone has their own opinion and is voting yes, no in this poll that you put out. What to you makes a program a college football blue blood?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. In some of the cold months before spring ball starts up, you see kind of the same arguments on Twitter, and, it goes back and forth, and you see everyone yelling at each other. So I wanted to try and put something together. A simple yes, no, a binary question, is Alabama a blue blood? Is Ohio State a blue blood, right? And do it for 18, 20 schools. Just go for law of large numbers. I had 130,000 votes this year because out of those 130,000, you probably have 130,000 different definitions. So I figured this was just a law of large numbers kind of public perception thing. So when you poll that big of the population, the results are pretty, they stand out. There's a significant pack at the top of 8 schools that consistently over the last 4 years, even through their ups and downs, they are the clearly voted blue bloods, and that's I know list radio isn't very great, but I'll just list them real quick. It's Alabama at the top, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, USC, Michigan, and then Nebraska and Texas. And when you break down those 8, there's a 3-team pack at the top that's really separated, and that's Alabama, Ohio State, and Oklahoma, all over 90%, vote getters. And when you look at each one of them, they've really been dominant every single era and almost every single decade too. There's really rare rough patches for Oklahoma and Alabama. I think they had some sanction years over the 70s, 80s, 90s here and there, but really, really rare to have them down. So I think blue blood, and not to speak for the 130,000 that voted, but I think it's something to be said about being elite and national championship caliber over several generations, not just, who's hot the last 5 or 10 years, but, teams that were dominant and really owned the sport when your grandfather was watching, when he was growing up, when your dad was watching, when you grew up, that kind of thing. These programs that are always there, always at the top. They might have 5 or 10 years down, but in general, the teams that are always at the top and competing. And I think you see that because teams that are on the fence here, Nebraska and Texas hasn't won a national title since 2005 and went through a pretty rough decade there after Mac Brown. And then with Nebraska, they've had to wait even longer. It's been since 97 since their national title, and haven't won a conference title since 99. So and to see that they continue to be in this blue blood pack by a sizable margin too, speaks to that, where it's bigger than just a 5 or 10 year time frame. It's more generational. So it's a very inexact science, but when you have this many people voting, this shows you where the public perception's at.
Yeah, and you avoid also the single team bias issue that you can run into, where if a whole bunch of Nebraska fans all vote, then Nebraska ends up getting a yes, and it's like, well, if there's 130, like that, with 130,000 people voting, that overwhelms any single fan base. And yeah, they are a 63% yes, and it is jarring to be in Lincoln and look at the facing of the luxury boxes on the opposite side from the press box, and they have national titles up there and conference titles, and it's just year after year after year after year after year. And then there's 1999, and then there's nothing, and it's just empty wall. And it's like, man, oh man, go back to the 1990s. And I'm old enough to remember Tom Osborne coaching the Huskers. I'm not Bob Devaney old, but I am Tom Osborne old. And to imagine telling someone back then, yeah, this is going to be the last one they win for at least 22 years. Oh, and by the way, then they're going to be in the Big Ten. Like, I'm not sure which part of that would have blown my mind the most, but Nebraska was a 63% yes. Miami was just shy of 63% no. And, again, back then, like, Miami was one of the most powerful programs in the country, but there's not really the history there. They were not much of anything before Howard Schnellenberger showed up. There's another one, though, that was interesting to me that was a no, which was Penn State, because Penn State over the years has been a pretty good, consistent program. And they had some downtimes in the early 2000s under Joe Paterno, and then they had some downtimes after the Sandusky sanctions in the 2011s. But I mean, Joe Paterno had them as, he won some national championships. He had some undefeated teams that I think didn't win national championships. But, they were, I think 58% no or something like that. Was that surprising to you? That was one that of all of them kind of jumped out to me as one that program has been good enough since 1950 or so that I was expecting them to be a pretty comfortable yes, and they were a no. Was that surprising to you?
Yes and no. I mean, well, first of all, real quick with the Miami and Nebraska talk, it's ironic because Nebraska's been down for about 15 years and otherwise been a clear-cut blue blood. Miami really only had a 15-year window where they were elite, and that was from that 83 title of Howard Schnellenberger up until the Coker year, 01, maybe you could argue 02, and Ohio State beat them. That was still a great team. But really the last 20 years, they've struggled too. So over the course of Miami's history, they've had about a decade and a half of dominance, and the rest has been totally irrelevant. So I can understand why some might interpret blue blood to being more than just that, a great, incredible stretch, 15 years. I think it was 4 titles in 9 years, something like that, or 4 and 13. I got to check that. But anyways, with Penn State, yeah, and here's the thing with Penn State, they always finish ninth. I talked about that chunk of 8 teams that always, 60% plus, yes, they're always ninth, Penn State. But by a sizable margin, though, it's worth noting there is a clear-cut drop-off from that top 8, but they're always number 9. Yeah, you mentioned the undefeated seasons. I wonder if they had been a part of a conference or maybe scheduled a bit harder. Remember, they were independent all the way until 1993 or 94 before joining the Big Ten. And, ever since, World War II or so, the Northeast footprint of the country really lost their football power. So all these teams Penn State was playing, they weren't really on the national radar as much. So I wonder if some of those undefeated teams, had they been in a conference and won a big title and won a bigger bowl game, could they have claimed more national titles? Because when you look at it, they only have 2, and it was 82 and 86. So, and then you look at all the teams that we had mentioned, they have, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11 national titles, and have been over different decades too, just different generations, always dominant, always playing for titles. So I don't know. It's tough. I mean, it's, again, very inexact. They have the wins. They're always ninth in wins, undefeated years, a huge alumni base. I know it because I'm based out of Pennsylvania. Yeah, they're not in the blue blood category, according to the national population.
So finally, last program I'm going to ask you about, the one that Ohio State fans spend most time thinking about outside of their own, and possibly even more than their own at times, Michigan.
Clemson?
On Twitter. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, that too. Clemson was an easy no, which is crazy thinking now. And then you realize, like, oh yeah, between Danny Ford and Dabo Swinney, they really didn't do anything, and they weren't a whole heck of a lot before Danny Ford got there for long stretches. So yeah, it's not as crazy as you might think that Clemson was a no there. But yes, Michigan on Twitter, right when this poll came out, you thought that was kind of surprising that the results for Michigan were what they were, that they are still fairly comfortably a yes.
Yeah, so here's what I was trying to talk about there on Twitter is, every year I put this out, it's the same couple teams that really get scrutinized and argued, and you see all the numbers and everyone arguing about different numbers and data. It's always about Nebraska, whether they belong, whether Texas belongs, or whether, Penn State or Miami can make the case, that kind of thing. Consider them bubble teams, if you will, and we're near March Madness. But I'm surprised that Michigan's never on the bubble, never really talked about. It's never touched. No one ever digs into it. When you look at Michigan, they haven't won a national title since 1948, an outright national title. I know in '97 they split, but you're talking about a one split title over 3 or 4 generations. I don't understand why they're not even in the discussion, and especially the last 10 years going. Well, you would know better than me. I think it's 1-14 against Ohio State, just not even competitive in most of those games. So I don't know. I think that they're definitely a blue blood, in my opinion, but I think that they should be in that category where we're looking a little closer and, having some debates about it, because I don't know why they're in the untouchable category. So that's my little mini rant there, and it's always fun. It's a great topic in the off season when, it's too early for spring ball. You're still, getting over the previous season. So it kind of fills that January, February gap a little bit.
Well, mentioned earlier, you probably had Ohio State fans nodding along with you when you were talking about, why this spring is going to be interesting for Ohio State. I have a feeling you probably had some Ohio State fans nodding along with you there as you were dissecting Michigan's resume a little bit. That's probably not going to be an unpopular thing among our listenership. Have you noticed a trend year over year that it's easier to move from a yes to a no, or teams are more likely to move from a no to a yes? Because you've done this for a few years now. Is there a real clear trend that it's much easier to become a blue blood or to become not a blue blood, or are people trends, shaking out one way or the other there?
Well, I think that this kind of speaks to it being a longer term view. There isn't much shift year to year. The top 8 has never changed in all the 4 years I've done it. It's that same 8. Now, maybe the order might shift a spot or two. I know Oklahoma had the biggest gain this year. I'm not sure exactly why year to year that would happen, because Oklahoma is kind of in the same spot as they were a year ago. maybe just adding that sixth straight Big 12 title, really solidifying them as one of the best teams, best programs ever. But yeah, I think it's harder to move down would be my answer to that. I mean, really the team that's tanked over the 4 years I've done this is Tennessee, where what was 4 years ago? Yeah, 2017 was my first blue blood poll I did, and they were right in that 10th, 11th range. Right near 35-40%. Now you look at it, they're almost falling off the map. They're at 17% yes. Even just from last year, they fell down 17%. So I think that Tennessee, you're seeing a program's perception just being, lit on fire like a dumpster, as they say, and really just moving down. Not that I agree or disagree on that, but that's just the perception of it. So, you see them really falling down the ladder.
And before we let you go, I want to throw in a plug in here for you. You have a very cool set of Ohio State mini helmets available for sale on your site. Let people know about those, because that is, if I know anything about Ohio State fans, it's they like Ohio State stuff and they like to buy Ohio State stuff. And that seems very much the kind of Ohio State stuff people might like to buy. So let people know about your Ohio State mini helmets.
Yeah, thanks. So what I do with Pick Six Previews, you might have seen on Twitter my helmet board, where each week I put up my predictions of each game using mini helmets. Over the years, I kept getting questions, hey, how do you get these mini helmets? Do you sell them? And the answer was, yeah, I custom design them and I do sell them. So I started making throwback sets for teams. So for example, with Ohio State, I have it's a 10 helmet set. You have the old ones from the 50s, so I got a red helmet, a white one with the numerals. Then in the 70s, I have the Archie Griffin style with the huge, the large Buckeye stickers. And then more recently with some alternates like the one with the green leaves and the black face mask. And if you can't tell from the interview, I'm very detail oriented. So these are exact replicas. So I've loved doing it. It just really took off the last few months. And then not just that, we do high schools too. I mean, I got a lot of high school orders, some bulk for their teams too. Coaches handing them out end of the season as a keepsake, but families, senior awards, that kind of thing. So it's been great. And Ohio State's is up. It's pick6previews.com. Just click on helmet store. It's at the top. You can't miss it. And if you see it on Twitter too, I've been tweeting out photos of it too. So yeah, thanks for the praise there and the plug. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and you mentioned being detail oriented. If you have read his preseason book, he is extremely detail oriented. I read every page of that last summer. Came away having learned a ton about just all teams all across the country, not just about the teams from last year, but actually, historical trends, the impact head coaches have had, top schools for NFL draft picks by position through different time frames. That is something that I refer back to quite a bit. Referred through last season, and even now, I still find myself looking back at it to look something up. Crazy amount of really interesting info. And Brett, I guess the best way for people to keep an eye out for that is to follow you on Twitter and check the website for pre-order information. Is that the best way for people to who are looking to buy that book this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Follow us or follow me at Pick Six Previews on Twitter, and it's pick6previews.com. And hopefully we'll be talking again, May or June when we're closer to the release, and talk some predictions and get that teased a bit and really dive into 2021.
Absolutely, can't wait. Looking forward to it, and should be a very interesting spring football season between now and then. Should have lots of new stuff to talk about. So, Brett, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Anytime.
And if you want to know more about the most interesting spring football game and spring football practices going on across the nation and the college football blue blood Ohio State program, you can find that all at buckeyescoop.com. We have a ton of coverage of recruiting, all sorts of insider reports on what's going on inside the Woody Hayes right now as they're getting ready to start spring football. That is 2 weeks away from starting, and then the spring game is about a month and a half away. So that is all coming fast, coming furious. It is all at buckeyescoop.com. You can also check out all of our great podcasts. We've had a ton of great podcasts drop this week. You can find those on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Spreaker, wherever you get your podcasts. You can get our podcasts. Just subscribe right there. You can just type in Buckeye Scoop. That'll give you all of them. You can subscribe right there. And then you can also leave us a 5-star rating and review. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We will talk to you on Monday.